Hello again, Peter Saturday from Universal Dork. I'm back again today to talk about some Ozploitation cult classic films, particularly one of my favorites from 1985, a film called Fortress. Yeah, Fortress is an absolute gem. It is a genre mashup. It's like equal parts horror, action, thriller, and sort of coming of age, mixed with a little Amblin Kids in Danger style film from the 80s going on here as well, all taking place in the Outback from the land down under, Australia itself. Fortress stars Rachel Ward, as you can see right there. Check her out. She is an absolute 1980s babe. And from a young age, I had kind of a crush on her because I would go to the video store with my dad and I would see that particular VHS cover that's actually pretty iconic and really ingrained into my head of a movie called Against All Odds. I believe she starred in it with Chris Christopherson. But that one's got a pretty racy cover where they're sort of laying on the beach together, ready to get busy. And as a kid, I kind of checked that one out all the time and looked down the back, and boy. But she also stars in some films from the 1980s that I've already been a pretty big fan of, or at least they've been on my radar for a long time as films that I really enjoy, particularly one called The Final Terror. And the funny thing about this particular film here, this actual Blu-ray, is this was the very first Blu-ray that I ever bought. I was kind of resistant to the Blu-ray technology, and I guess nowadays people would probably say that being a collector of physical media and stuff like that is kind of outdated, and you kind of sort of got to get with the times because everyone is streaming the fuck out of everything. However, The Final Terror was a film that I had on VHS for a long time, and I've always wanted to see this thing cleaned up because the print and the picture on the VHS tape was notoriously dark. And most of this film takes place in the wilderness. I'm not exactly sure where it's filmed, but it's filmed in some really amazing locations. So it's all like mountainous, and it looks like Pacific Northwest maybe. Hopefully I'm right about that since I live there, but this one definitely is a top-notch slasher. And being the first Blu-ray that I bought, I really wanted to put it to the test and see exactly how well this sort of, cleaned up look that everyone was kind of bragging that these Blu-rays had. I wanted to see how that really held up, and I was fucking amazed. So Rachel Ward stars in The Final Terror along with Daryl Hannah. I mean, two mega 1980s babes in one film. Gotta love it, as well as Joe Pantoliano, who is kind of also a 1980s man babe to some people. Not that many, but I've heard some people have legit crushes on that guy. But another film that Rachel Ward stars in that I just actually watched again was Night School from 1980, which is also a slasher film. Not nearly as good as The Final Terror. In fact, I was a big fan of this one the very first time that I watched it. It's actually got a pretty good whodunit story going on at its core, and it's a pretty good slasher film in general. But upon the second watch and having known, the whole twist that takes place in the film, I guess that I was a little less than impressed this time. Definitely worth one watch if you don't know about the twist ending of Night School. But Rachel Ward also stars in this. I believe it says that this is her very first film debut here. But just the fact that she's in this film is worth the price of admission alone, I say. But as far as Ozploitation films go, like weird cult classic films from Australia, there have been a lot of really good ones in the past that I'm kind of a big fan of myself. In particular, a film called Razorback, which is an amazing creature feature. If you've never seen Razorback, you got to check that out. It's like the cinematographer from Mad Max behind that one. It looks gorgeous, and it is an incredible monster movie. Very dark in tone, very bleak. Kind of almost looks like a post-apocalyptic backdrop, which I guess that cinematographer kind of sets that up in the same way that he did in Mad Max. Razorback was always one of my favorites as a kid. I watched that over at my friend's house at a far too young age probably to see that film. But as far as a big pig movie goes, which it is, it's a giant killer pig. It's sort of like Jaws taking place in Australia. That one is absolutely top notch. And there's been other films over the years, one called Road Games with Jamie Lee Curtis that I find to be a pretty awesome film as well, kind of a horror thriller. Also another film called, I think it's Encounter at Ravensgate. I watched that a few years ago. That one was pretty interesting as well. Really strange, bizarre plot in that one. And also a movie called The Quest from the 80s with Elliot from E.T. The Quest is kind of a cool kid's adventure. Really has that same vibe as an Amblin film as well. Not just because of the main character in the movie, but just the way it feels in general. It's sort of a weird kids in danger coming of age film from Australia. Maybe a creature feature, maybe not. I have been hoping for a Blu-ray of this movie Fortress for a long time, because this one really rises above all of the films that I mentioned before from Australia. And also, I've been looking forward to the alternate cut. I think there was a Hungarian version of Fortress that has kind of like an alternate ending, and it has additional, kind of gnarly footage that they cut from this version, and the version in Australia even. Anything that could make this one even more gnarly than it really is already, I would be very excited to see. Fortress is pretty straightforward and pretty simple, and I appreciate something like that. This one moves at a nice brisk pace too. And why don't I just let you in on the plot? I'll read it off of the back of the VHS. All right, here we go. One teacher and 9 students stalked by terror. Fortress is their lesson in survival. It is morning in the one-room schoolhouse in the Australian Outback. The young teacher, Rachel Ward, calls her class to order. It is a day like any other, until the unexpected occurs. 4 masked gunmen break into the schoolhouse, kidnap the teacher and her class, and transport them to the barren countryside. Terrorized and abandoned, the victims come to a shocking realization. Only they can save themselves from an almost certain death. Yes, this is, like I said, at its core, it's mainly a thriller with tinges of horror in it, action, and also sort of that Amblin vibe. Now, I guess that this film was based on an actual true incident, but loosely, which I'm sure they exaggerated a lot here. The 1972 Faraday kidnapping, I believe Sydney, Australia. So Rachel Ward is taken captive with these children. The kids are probably from ages probably like 8 to like 15, and they're all pretty freaked out. They're packed into a van, driven out into the countryside, and forced to go down into a cavern and hang out all together, just the kids and Rachel Ward, while these masked men, who are all wearing these super creepy masks, some of them have like animal masks on, and the main guy is wearing a Santa Claus mask, and he is referred to in the movie over and over as Father Christmas. That's the name that Rachel Ward and the children give to him, kind of like their code name for him. And this guy is a pretty sinister villain. He kind of leads these other 3 guys. He calls all the shots here, and he's looking to get some ransom money. And if he doesn't, his plan is most definitely to kill them all. And he also, at one point in the film, jokes around with the other guys that he has plans for Rachel Ward as well. He's looking at having his way with her. And that alone, she kind of catches wind of that. And she hears all of these disturbing things that these guys are talking about. But the cool thing is, throughout all of these highly stressful situations, and Rachel Ward kind of hearing their sinister plans for the kids, their plans to execute people, she keeps her cool throughout the entire movie as a very strong female lead. So, I mean, there's been over the years kind of this claim made from people in Hollywood and on the internet that this whole strong female lead thing is like some new phenomenon that is happening in Hollywood, and we've never seen that before. And I'm here to tell you that that was going on in the 80s, and they were doing it better back then than they are today. Things were not so in your face and on the nose with some of these themes of like strong leading ladies in films. Rachel Ward is really able to fall into the role here with ease too, throughout all of these gnarly situations, and just sort of keep her cool and remain hyper-focused on keeping the kids safe. She is put down with the children into this creepy cavern, and while they're kind of spelunking around in the caves, it leads them to this pool of water that they all have to dive under, and some of the kids can't swim that well, and Rachel Ward and one of the older kids actually kind of team up, help all of these children together. So there's an older character, the kid in here, he's probably about 15 years old, who really rises to the occasion. And other things, I think, are kind of rising to the occasion too, because Rachel Ward at one point, before she goes in to test the waters here, literally, this kid is sort of standing there watching her undress. And you can kind of tell here that he's kind of seeing some stuff for the first time that he has never seen in person before. This kid's got to kind of take charge of the situation several times as he sees that Rachel Ward is kind of psychologically faltering, letting some of these things get to her a little bit. He takes charge in the cave, as the cave, they're thinking, opens up to the wilderness. That's where I see this as kind of a bit of a coming-of-age film as well, because a lot of these kids, even the young ones, kind of have to all pull up their big boy pants and their big girl skirts. If any one of these kids becomes sort of dead weight, the whole plan fails of them trying to get away from these bad guys. And I don't want to give too much away after this, but there's a great scene where they encounter some kangaroos. Very iconic kind of Australian filmmaking scene here in this super creepy, foggy forest out there. They're wandering through. These criminals are not far behind. Father Christmas is determined to capture Rachel Ward, and now he's got a personal vendetta. They travel all across the countryside together, and they've all got to be watching each other's backs. They stumble upon this strange farm in the middle of the woods as well, and things get very creepy there. Take a couple wild twists and turns. There's some great action sequences here. Around this time is really when the horror kind of kicks in too, because this film, at first you might think we're just watching a PG-13 film, but Fortress pulls no punches. There is blood and guts in here and some pretty cool practical effects going on with the kills and the gore that you see take place. Admittedly, is pretty shocking when it enters the scene of this film because things escalate quite quickly into the R-rated territory and we get treated to an ultra wild, bizarre, and violent finale. So about 3/4 of the way through this movie, we get a little bit of a tonal shift from the characters. The tables begin to turn as the hunted slowly become the hunters. Yes, Rachel Ward and this group of kids have kind of reached their breaking point. And they kind of decide that they just can't run anymore and that they've got to stand their ground. And boy, do they ever. It kind of turns into a bit of like a Home Alone style setup in the Australian Outback. Like I said, very satisfying conclusion because these kids kind of enter into a sort of like Lord of the Flies style mentality. And if you've ever seen that movie, you know how wild those kids get in there. They get this kind of little bit of like a bloodthirsty rage inside of them. Once we reach that moment in the film, all bets are off. These kids take on a whole new persona. Rachel Ward takes on a whole different style vibe in this final battle. And boy, do these killers get a lot more than they bargained for. I think that anyone who's into cult cinema and Ozploitation is going to have an incredible time with this finale here. This movie, on first watch, the final 30 seconds of this film, I think are my favorite of the entire movie. I've got to really respect Fortress because that ending there really does deliver the goods. It will shock you, and the choice that was made by whoever wrote this film to include that ending really gives this film that extra hard edge that I never saw coming. This thing showcases some of the coolest parts of Australia and also gives us some really sinister villains, some really great characters with the little kids here, lots of great action. Like I said, some blood and guts that kind of comes in and creeps in out of nowhere, kind of raising the film's stakes. This film is an absolute 4.5 stars. I gave it on Letterboxd. And the director, Arch Nicholson, having just rewatched Fortress again, have really kind of made me interested to see some of the other stuff that he did. I think he's got this film called Dark Age, which is like a killer crocodile movie. He's got another movie called Buddies that looks kind of cool. There's at least 2 other films of his that I'm very interested in seeing. So I'm just glad that he did such an amazing job on Fortress. Way to go, Arch. So someone give this thing a Blu-ray release. I want to see this thing get a huge cult following in the United States because there are a lot of people that have never heard of this film before. The first time I saw this was probably about 10 years ago, and I'm so surprised that this one flew under my radar and evaded me for so long. I don't know how the hell that happened. Fortress, originally released by HBO in the United States in 1985, and then in 1986, I guess, it was released in Australia, and then there's that crazy Hungarian version of the movie that I so desperately want to see. So yeah, check this out. Absolutely love Fortress. Can't say enough great things about it. All right, that's it for me. I'm going to have to leave the land down under today and get back to the wonderful state of Oregon. I look forward to talking to you soon, and I will see you next time.